Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Ryan McCormack, Factor and Core Equity Strategist at Invesco, to discuss weekly performance in the QQQ. We'll also take a look at key inflation data. Ryan, it's great to see you as always. Welcome back to Trade Talks. Give us a high-level overview of the performance that we saw in the Qs over the week and what stood out to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. It was a very solid week for stocks as November's positive price performance has continued. Last week, we saw QQQ and QQQM gain 2.03%, while the S&P 500 index advanced by 2.31%, and the S&P 500 value index was up 2.84%. Prices were in focus as inflation readings continue to abate. And then as we kind of look out for the year, we see kind of continued growth dominance with QQQM and QQQ up 45.71% and 45.59% respectively. That's outperforming the S&P 500 up 19.28% and the S&P 500 value index of 13.76%.
And if we take a look at sectors, where was the attribution really driven from?
Yeah, so, again, it was a solid week. We saw all S&P 500 GIC sectors finish in positive territory, while all but one sector in QQQ finished higher. Energy was the lone exception, with Baker Hughes's negative performance pushing the sector into the red for the Nasdaq-100. Financials and industrial sector underweights and underperformance against their counterparts in SPY, the S&P 500 proxy, that weighed most on relative outperformance. On the other side, healthcare outperformance, led by an overweight to Intuitive Surgical within QQQ, contributed most to relative performance for QQQ. That stock's seen 6 straight days of positive performance, and if today holds, that would make 7. Also, the consumer discretionary sector overweight and outperformance against its counterpart in SPY also contributed positively to outperformance. That was driven by Tesla's advance of over 9% for the week. From its relative high back in July 18th, the stock was down over 31.5% through the end of October. But as I said, that November kind of positive price momentum has taken hold, and since the end of October through Friday, the stock's been up 16.66%.
And finally, Ryan, let's take a look at some key inflation data.
Yeah, so as we look back to last week, we got the release of the October CPI report, and it came in lower than expectations across the board. All right, so we saw headline CPI on a year-over-year basis at 3.2%, better than estimates of 3.3% and 3.7% 1 month earlier. Month over month showed no change versus estimates for 0.1% growth. The core reading, which is the one that's showed to be a little bit stickier, that's ex-food and energy, it followed suit with year over year at 4.0% versus an expectation of 4.1%, which is the same level as the reading of September. And on a month over month perspective, at 0.2% versus expectations for 0.3%. The following day, we saw PPI, which Producer Price Index, that also surprised, right? Continued to show that downtrend of inflation. Headline came in at 1.3% versus expectations for 1.9%. So pretty stark difference. And then on a month over month basis, we saw a 0.5% decline versus a forecast of 0.1% growth. So with that, we look generally at Fed funds futures because it sort of gives a little bit of visibility into what the Fed might be thinking. A hike in the December meeting, which is scheduled for the 12th through the 13th, is basically off the table from a Fed funds futures perspective. Then they have a 32% chance of a rate cut priced in for the March 2024 meeting. So I think ultimately the street saw these price reports as pretty solid progress against inflation and starting to see the potential makings of a soft landing. What happened is we saw the equity rally broaden out a little bit. Right, we saw value outperform growth. We saw equal weight outperform market cap weight, mid caps outperforming large caps, and small caps outperforming both mid and large. So, we're starting to see that broaden out as the expectations or the potential for that economic landing or soft landing taking hold. And then just some events to keep an eye on. We have the Fed minutes scheduled to be released. And then tomorrow after the bell, we have NVIDIA earnings. That's going to be very closely watched given the past 2 monster earnings reports from the chip maker.
All right, Ryan, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.